Welcome to Speaking Concretely, the official podcast of the Cement Association of Canada. I'm your host, Adam Auer, President and CEO of the CAC. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming someone who's been central to this association's work for the past 2 years, my board chair, Oliver Patsch. Oliver is president of Heidelberg Materials North America's Northwest region, one of the world's largest integrated building material companies, and a company that's been making news in Canada recently with major acquisitions in both British Columbia and Alberta. Oliver, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, hello, Adam. Thank you for having me here.
Oliver, Heidelberg Materials has been quite active in Canada lately, new acquisitions in BC and Alberta, and a global strategy that clearly sees North America as a priority. Given the geopolitical turmoil that we're facing in Canada right now, what does that signal about where the Canadian market is headed in your view, and what should our listeners understand about the industry's current trajectory?
Yeah, I would say there is a lot of changes happening in our industry. There is one topic that I would say stays, that is the decarbonization of our industry. And we are clearly over the last years moving from ambition to execution. And you know that we have set together in 2023 our roadmap for Concrete Zero. And we are now, over the last couple of years, really executing on these projects. And we can see a lot of investments happening in our industry. On the other side, what really is impacting us are all the demand fundamentals. I would say in Canada, the fundamentals are strong. We need more housing. There is a lot of nation building projects that are in the pipeline. But we need to make sure that these projects are really happening, because over the last couple of years, demand is declining. We had over the last, 4 or 5 years, a 15% reduction in volumes. So this is clearly a topic that we need to further follow up. And then I would say lately, also all the trade and climate policy is changing very quickly. We know that from the CUSMA agreement that has been revoked now by Donald Trump, or is not being renewed. Yes, we are still protected here until 2036, but still we need to make sure that we as an industry are staying here on a level playing field. And then the last one, as we said, is about the climate policy that clearly the Canadian government is currently formulating, and we need to make sure that these policies are very clear and workable for us, and give enough certainty to make investments.
Well, there's quite a bit to unpack there, but I want to maybe start first with the market fundamentals piece, because a big part of the work that we do at the CAC is effectively sort of industrial policy work. And we now have a government with Carney as prime minister that has come in with a fairly distinctive tone around industrial policy, including decarbonization, as you mentioned. There's a Buy Canada agenda, Build Canada Strong. As board chair, where do you see the biggest policy levers that you're hearing from this government, and where are you most concerned that the opportunity might be missed?
First of all, really starting with the demand-driven policies. But as I mentioned before, the wish to build and all the nation building projects is clearly there. But there is a gap between the policy announcement and actual project execution. So one of the things that we as an industry need to work on with the government together is really getting faster permitting, faster approvals, reducing all the red tape that we currently have in the construction sector. And then also, I would say, a much better coordination between federal, provincial, and municipal levels, because this is really holding us currently back. And then especially regarding housing, that we need to push that really housing, there is a big demand, but again, we need to make sure that this is really being delivered and really projects being started. So I think that's clearly one priority that we need to work on. And the second one, back to the decarbonization, is that we need to get investment certainty. There is a lot of change that currently happened to the carbon policy. And still, there are open question marks how exactly the carbon policy will look like. And it's important when we are a hard-to-abate sector, and all our decarbonization needs big investments. So here, clearly, we need a stable and predictable carbon policy that companies can really make the big investments.
I'm going to ask a few decarbonization questions in a second, but just sticking with the infrastructure piece for one more minute, because there is this kind of irony out there. Often when I'm out with my team, and I know you're hearing the same messages, speaking with government officials, they seem to have a sense that the industry must be booming because, all of these announcements of major projects in infrastructure. But clearly there's a gap between announcements and the flow of investment into our sector. But ironically, despite that, officials are often asking us, we're spending a lot of money on major projects. There's a $51 billion fund through the Build Community Strong Fund, for example, on top of all the nation building projects that the Major Projects Office has been set up ostensibly to accelerate. The question we're actually hearing is, do we have the supply chain to keep up with all of this demand that must be coming down the pipe? How do you respond to sort of a gap in understanding about the capacity of an industry to actually supply materials for a significant push on infrastructure at a time when actually we're seeing sort of the opposite in the market, that the demand for that supply is low?
Yeah, I would say maybe 2 points to this. Number one is really that we are at a historical low currently as the overall demand, and we are just around 10 million tons of cement demand. So the industry has a lot of idle capacity in our plants to meet the increased demand. And we know the whole cement industry is a very local industry, local supply chains. And we also continue to make investments into, for example, so-called alternative or SEMs, so supplemental materials like fly ash, slag, or even alternative binders. And this all will help to really meet the demand that is currently out there. So I'm not concerned that we don't have the capacity to deliver on these. And worst case, when we have even import capabilities, so if there are certain peaks, I think the industry can also import certain material. But I think that's still much further out until this is required.
What about on the labor side? I mean, what are you seeing in terms of labor force capacity? Is the trades pipeline keeping pace with what we anticipate the industry will be asked to deliver?
I would say clearly not. We have in many areas, in general construction, but all the tradespeople is very difficult. I know in our industry, in my company, very difficult to find good tradespeople. So I think that should be also one of the focus areas to get more qualified people into the country and helping us really to deliver on these demand levels.
Sort of going against the kind of current policies where we see actually a decrease in immigration that is likely to have an impact on labor supply going forward. So you've mentioned decarbonization a few times. I want to bring up the sustainability conversation for a minute here. Cement, I think, is well known for its carbon footprint among those who are active in the climate policy space, and certainly has been a target for decarbonization by policymakers here in Canada and around the world. But at the same time, there's a huge amount happening in our industry on innovation that not everyone, I think, is fully aware of. You mentioned a few of them, different low carbon cements, supplementary cementitious materials, and of course, Heidelberg in particular has been deeply invested in carbon capture technology. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening sort of broadly in the cement space and maybe what Heidelberg Materials specifically is doing to reduce their carbon emissions?
Yeah, you mentioned that we worked as an industry over the last years to really, on a very broad scale, to decarbonize. Yes, especially Heidelberg has been the leader clearly in the field of CCUS technology. You know that we have last year started our first worldwide carbon capture plant in Brevik in Norway that is now capturing and storing 400,000 tons of CO2 under the sea in Norway. But we are also working, and also the whole industry, on many other, I would say, conventional levers to decarbonize. For example, alternative fuels is a very big lever that we have. Already in Europe, many cement plants are at 80, 90, even 100% replacement of traditional fuels like gas and oil. So these alternative fuels is really now also here in Canada more and more growing. We have made a couple of years back in a big investment in our Edmonton plant that helps decarbonization. And then we're also working on the digital side that helps us also to decarbonize. For example, we have kiln and mill expert systems that help us. It's like a remote cruise control that keeps our operation stable in the operation, and that drives efficiency and also helps to stay with lower energy consumption, and this also helps to decarbonize. And then I would say maybe one big element that we not talked so far about it is really on the commercial side. I think it's very important, in addition to all these supply-driven items, that we also work very much on commercializing the products, because only if really the customers and end users are willing to pay for these products a premium, only then really the decarbonization is really scaling over the whole industry. And at Heidelberg, when we developed here our global product line, EvoBuild, that is a sustainability product line. So at a minimum, 30% less CO2 and or minimum 30% of recycled material. And we plan as a company here by 2030 to have 50% of all our products in that segment. So that shows also how important really the demand side is to get decarbonization moving.
And you started opening remarks of the podcast talking a little bit about the changes in the policy environment around decarbonization. And I wonder maybe if you could unpack just a little bit what that means in the context of those two sort of strategies. You talked about the supply side strategies. So that's the innovations that companies like Heidelberg are investing in and bringing to the market. And then also the demand side, how do you get the market to accept change and to adopt new materials and new practices that take advantage of those lower carbon innovations that Heidelberg and others are putting into the market? How do you, I think most people understand, for example, that carbon pricing is a big part of Canada's climate policy landscape and that there's been a lot of change. But, in addition to carbon pricing, what are the things that you're anticipating or worried about in terms of moving the supply side investments, and what are the things that are going well or maybe missing on moving the demand side as well?
Absolutely. I think this is a very big lever, and there really governments can really help and support us to get moving. So these are all the specifications that are being set. So procurement standards, for example, governments can set. There is the building codes and standards that we have that are currently extremely conservative, limiting us even in using more recycled material or limiting us in using more decarbonized modern binders. So I think clearly governments can help here if they set the right procurement standards. When a lot of projects are government-led or in some form, all these nation-building projects with some strong involvement from the government. So they can help here really to create a demand pull for these products, and really working, and we as an association working a lot on the building codes and standards. And I think this is a key part for us to really drive demand for products, because if there is a demand, then automatically the investments will come in our industry, and with this, the decarbonization.
I think that's a point that we have been collectively trying to make much more strongly recently, is that decarbonization is effectively investment in modernization and productivity and local jobs, by another name. So certainly in the context that we're facing today, where there's a huge focus on strengthening the Canadian economy in the face of the global headwinds, it's important to understand that decarbonization isn't just about the environmental story. It's also an investment story for Canada. So I definitely appreciate you bringing up that point. An extension of the climate conversation too, which I think flows very naturally from your mention just now of specifications and codes and standards, is the adaptation piece, right? A lot of the climate conversation has focused on mitigation, reducing our CO2 emissions. But, we're all, I think, increasingly aware of major climate events that are taking place in Canada and around the world, fires, floods, recently, extreme heat that we've seen here in North America, but also very acutely in Europe over the past few weeks. What role do you see concrete playing in that sort of resiliency and durability challenge as we build out these major projects and upgrade our infrastructure and housing, et cetera?
I would say a very big role. If you can see, you just mentioned all these extreme weather events that we more and more see in Canada and around the world. And in that context, really, durability and resiliency is not a nice to have. It's really a core economic and also public safety issue. And the advantage of concrete is that it combines strength, longevity, it's fire resistant, but is also very low in maintenance over a life cycle. So if you really look at the life cycle of 50 to 100 years, concrete is really the best material to build our infrastructure. And with this, I would really see that concrete and cement is getting much more important, strategic important really to build Canada in the future.
A lot of people don't appreciate that concrete's not just a structural material. As you say, it provides all these other services, right? Waterproof, fireproof, resistance to all sorts of external and internal extremes. So it's definitely part of a much broader value proposition. And I wonder, you talked already about some of the innovations that have been happening, in particular on the sustainability side, but you've been with Heidelberg Materials for over 10 years. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of changes in that time. Above and beyond the sustainability piece, how do you see innovation and technology evolving to meet, these sort of various demands of the material, but also the demands of, innovating on the production side as well?
Yeah, there's quite a lot of things happening. And of course, everyone hears about AI, about digital, but we have a couple of applications at Heidelberg that really drives this innovation. We have, for example, in a couple of our quarries already worldwide, now autonomous trucks that can help us with production efficiencies and productivities. Then I mentioned about the expert systems that we are using to run our kilns and our mills to, again, that brings us efficiencies. And maybe one of the bigger parts that we're currently working on is the so-called HROC. So it's Heidelberg's Remote Operation Center. So what we're doing here is that we, in North America, all our 16 cement plants that we have will be controlled in the future from one operating center in Dallas. And there we have all the experts and all the digital tools sitting, also AI-supported tools that really drives best practices and expertise. And that, again, helps us to be more efficient and productive in our operations. And we do similar things. For example, on the concrete side, you maybe have heard that Heidelberg invested into Command Alcon, a company that is supporting the concrete sector. And we are using here Command Assurance. So Command Assurance is a quality control. It's a probe directly in the drum of the concrete mixer and is constantly measuring the concrete properties like slump, temperatures, air. And with these, we can ensure that the product that comes to our customer is really continuously the best quality that is needed to build. So I think these are maybe a couple of innovations that Heidelberg is working on. And the other part, when you already mentioned, CCUS is very clearly a field that Heidelberg is very strong in. And we have many different technologies to work on different CCUS technologies.
So there's a lot of high tech sort of hidden in those. When you see that concrete mixer truck going by, you might not realize that there's a huge amount of tech that goes into the product that's being delivered out of the back of that truck. You're wrapping up a 2-year mandate as CAC board chair. I mean, we're halfway through the year only, really, so there's still 6+ months left. But when you look back on the year and a half that you've been in this role so far, how do you feel the industry has done in sort of progressing towards its goal? What do you feel the industry has gotten right over that period, and what sort of unfinished business do you plan to hand to your successor in January?
First of all, I really enjoyed my time over the last 2 years to work with you, with the whole team together, and with my colleagues from the other companies. Really an exciting time. What we really achieved, as I said at the beginning, is that from decarbonization, that we really just from target setting, which is the easy piece, moved into real execution. And we can really see that across the industry, there are projects being done that really have the impact in decarbonizing our sector. So I think that's where we as an industry can be proud of, that we really delivered on what we have promised. I would say the part, and that's what we also started to pivot maybe over the last 2 years, to get stronger focus really on the demand side. I think this is still, as we discussed, all the building codes and standards, procurement standards, there we are not yet there where we need to be, in my view. And here we need to work with the government to make sure that these standards are being defined. That helps us really with a demand pull for these sustainable products. And then lately, I think is really all the strategic importance of our sector for building out Canada. This is really where we need to set ourselves, and this is really back to also demand levels that we need to get up again. And I think if we're working on these fields then we get also higher productivities, efficiencies, and we should be seen as really a strategic sector for Canada.
Yeah, lots of exciting initiatives in that regard in the works. So hopefully our listeners will stay tuned or look out for some of the innovative things that we're planning on that front. Oliver, let me take this opportunity to thank you for your leadership on the board, but also for spending some time with us on the podcast.
Okay, thanks a lot, Adam. Yeah.
Thank you to our audience for listening, and don't forget to subscribe and follow our podcast on your favorite platform. We hope to see you next time.